So thank you very much for the impressive and insightful talk, Sebastien. So we are now moving to the Q&A part of this webinar. So we have some time left for that. I will read out the questions in the Q&A tool of Zoom. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them and we'll ask Sebastien for his thoughts on that. So we have a couple of questions already. Maybe I'll read that. The first one. So morph and deepfakes attacks need to be presented to the sensor. Therefore, will they be detected by the supports of the paper or screen detector? Is a specific detector necessary for these kinds of attacks?
That's a very good question. So here, the thing is that originally the morph attack and the deepfakes attacks, were not attacks considered for biometric. For presentation attacks, as the presentation attacks. So morph was more on the identity side. So the idea is to get a genuine document that contains a morph, right? But I consider that this is a kind of presentation attack which is performed at the enrollment stage. Therefore, I think there is a necessity to have presentation attack detection that is deployed anywhere you have enrollment or self-enrollment in general. Right. Then if you want to, so this is morph. So morphing for me, I consider it can be performed. It is mostly to be performed enrollment stage. Now, if it is performed at probing stage, right, it means that in order to present a morph, you need to use paper or do you need to use a display, right? So in which case, indeed, you fall back to the generic presentation attack instrument using paper or screen, and you can use the same techniques you will use to detect this form of attacks for the morphs as well. And the same comments apply to deepfakes. Deepfakes is just a technique to generate the data that is going to be displayed or presented. More particularly, in this case, it's only focusing at display devices, right? Not prints, because it doesn't make much sense to create a deepfake and especially deepfake video and to print it. Obviously, you cannot. So you will display it, and if you do this display at probe time, at test time, therefore the techniques that for the PID techniques that are used to display to detect the screens in general can be used.
Okay, so Sinki has a follow-up question on that. So for the morph attacks, I think presentation attacks are pretty well known. So morph attacks are also there's a lot of research on that. But I think maybe not everyone really is aware of what that is. Can you maybe provide a short description again on how morph attacks work and especially with identity?
So morph attack or morph presentation attack? Morph detection.
I think it's on morph attack.
Okay, so morph attack. Right. Let maybe put the slides again. So the first thing I encourage the people who are interested into it to first, where is it? Look at the work from the TIS team from Bologna, University of Bologna, David Maltone team. I provided the link in the presentation. So this is a starting point. Then there is a very good work. I would say a lot of work that is done by the team of Professor Christoph Busch in Europe. Right, so you can refer also to several years, many papers from him and his team working on morphing attack creation and detection. Right, so just to summarize again, so the idea is to take two images, two aligned faces, and originally the idea was to take traditional warping or morphing techniques that are very old, more than 20 years old, 20 years old, right? Techniques. To merge two images. So you have two faces were aligned and you create a new face which is going to have attributes from two different identities. When you do that, you have artifacts that appear. So generally the faces are not very well aligned in the beginning. For example, you're going to have artifacts on the hairs which are mixed. And of course, to the naked eyes, to someone that can be spotted. Right? You can see that. But generally, these morphs are retouched manually in order to make sure that you don't see much of those artifacts. And then If you take that image and you use this image as a reference, then you are going to see that if you take two images of the two original persons again, they are going to be positively recognized against that morph. So that's the principle of the attack. Nowadays, you can also create those morphs with, let's say, with stalgans. So you can take a stalgan, you can project the images, the two images into the stalgan to get the latent representation of the two images. You can do the interpolation of the latent space and the interpolated latent vector. You use the generator from the stalgan to generate the image, you are going to get a morph. It has been shown that there are less artifacts than in the traditional morphs, but it has been shown also that there is a tendency that the typical morphing attacks, the traditional morphing algorithms are generate morphs which are better quality. But I think this is going to change, and that we are going to see more and more morphs resulting from stalgans or the like. That will be more effective in terms of attack success rate. I hope it answers the question.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question in the Q&A. So usually when we look at presentation attacks, they are focused on biometric systems. So are there any presentation attacks targeting other things, not necessarily identity? So the participants ask about the motion recognition, but it could be other attributes, right? So maybe if you have a comment.
Right. So for the moment, presentation attacks is focused on the identity, right? So because this is a term which is defined in the context of a biometric system. Therefore, in biometric systems, we are aiming to recognize the identity. So right. So it's not defined in the context of, let's say, soft biometrics. But indeed, in principle, you could perform a presentation attack. Now, I don't know if you should call it differently, in order simply to be recognized as a man instead of woman, of someone of a given age, right? Something like this. You can assume, for instance, that you have an age verification system on the internet that checks your age before you can access to some content. You could think about bypassing that system, right? If you present the picture of someone who is older, right? So you change your identity, and this is valid for plenty of other scenarios. Now, strictly speaking, that won't be a presentation attack per definition in context of biometric system, but at the end of the day, this is the same process you are going to use.
So maybe a technical question. You mentioned that one of the main challenges is generalization to unknown attacks, right? So do you have any insight, or what do you see as a possible research direction to address these kinds of problems? So how to improve the generalization? What kind of technical solutions do you envision we will see in the future with this?
Oh, okay. I don't know what we are going to see in the future. I think so. So I think there are two problems. In generalization, there are two problems. There is the generalization problem to known attacks, right? Already. So for instance, if I create a recipe to create an attack and I give it to two different teams with the same setup and everything to collect two databases, and you develop a PID algorithm on one database and you test it on the other, is not going to generalize very well, and vice versa. And this is not well understood yet. So there is a form of overfitting, right? Somehow. So this we need still to study this more, or at least when you work on PID, you need to make sure that you always consider a scenario where you don't only train and test on the same database. You also should keep in mind the generalization to unseen data. So known attacks, but unseen data, so that you train test on one database, but you test as well on another database, right, that contain the same attacks systematically. That will be a way to make progress in generalization to known attacks in unseen scenarios. First thing. Then there is another problem, which is unseen attacks. So this is a difficult problem because, of course, this is completely unseen. So more and more it goes, there are less attacks, or that less novel attacks that appears, right? But you should never say never, of course. So you can always come with innovative attacks that is actually very successful. So in which case, I would give an advice to people which have ideas to create attacks, right? New attacks, to carefully, to test them carefully. So the question when we have an attack, especially for impersonation, is it really a threat? I mean, if you take a face recognition system if you make a presentation attack to duplicate the identity of someone, can you verify that actually you can recognize a person with those attacks? So verify the vulnerability, the AAPMR. Very important thing, because if your attack doesn't present a threat, there is no point.
Yeah.
Very important thing. Then how to cope with this problem of generalization to unseen attacks. So I would say that first we are reaching the limit. I think we are reaching the limit to what we can do with a color only. Right, because I think we explored almost everything. As that's going to be very, very challenging to detect very good attacks with just this. And it's time to explore and to push for using other spectra. Near infrared is one easy case because it's affordable as well. It's widely developed as well, deployed. But others, we could push the industry also to deploy others, to push for and deploy other forms of sensors which are more advanced, that would help to be robust to a larger range of attacks. Right, that would be one way to address the generalization. And this other approach I would be keen on investigating would be abnormal detection frameworks. So because since you cannot model what you are not going to see, what you can do is that you can model what you know. You can model the distribution of what is a bona fide. You can model the distribution of the attacks you know, and maybe you can put in place a probabilistic framework, right? That maybe with form of log likelihood ratio, where you can model you can classify the probe according to this probabilistic model. So modeling what you know in the kind of abnormal detection scenario.
So one class learning approaches, and they've made a lot of waves also in different areas. So that's really a potential way to go. So there's a question from Professor Misra. So what about bias in presentation attack detection? Are the existing solutions that we have or that are available, do we have insight of whether these are biased to certain either demographic characteristics or other characteristics of the data?
So I don't know for sure. I know that this is a topic which is gaining some traction. There are more and more researchers. I've seen a couple of papers on this topic, but very frankly, I cannot answer definitely on this. It's likely indeed that there is a bias because most of the PAD systems are deep learning based. Deep learning based are well known for to learn very well the demographics from the training data. So if your training data is biased, I mean statistically, it is going to carry that bias at test time. So so in which case, we also need to define what is bias. Do we have metrics, right, to measure that bias in a PAD system? Can we use the metrics which are used, because these metrics exist in biometrics to evaluate if a biometric system, let's say face recognition system, is biased towards the demographics more than towards another one? So there are metrics that exist. Can we use those metrics for PAD algorithms as well? I don't know. But I think definitely there is an area of research there as well.
So maybe related to that, there's a comment in the chat. So most presentation attacks and morphing are done on adult data sets. So that's probably related also to bias and demographic bias. Are you aware of any data sets that would also include children or younger individuals?
So yes, that's true that PAD datasets are mostly contains adults, but one of the reasons is that it's very difficult to collect data from children's, right? Also, for most of the applications, it's unlikely actually that we are going to have a children that perform the attack. I mean, most of the applications biometrics. I'm not saying that it's impossible. So And for all those reasons that explain why we as far as I know, there are no databases with children's, right? I would say, and this is going to be even more difficult to collect the databases involving children. We may consider another direction to create data sets, maybe synthetic data sets with this kind of demographics. Also, I must say that as far as I know, also most of the data sets that's been kept, PID data sets, don't contain beta data such as the demographics. So generally, we don't know if the subjects is a male or female, or we don't know the geographic origin, and we don't know the age either. It's very rare. So which means that it's difficult to make such a study. You need to reannotate the data or to create data sets which contain this metadata.
Okay, so there's another question in the chat. So what's your opinion about using federated learning approaches in biometrics? So both regarding training and decentralized distributed manner attacks, things like that.
Right. Right. I think this is a more general question. Biometrics is not really relevant to the PAD, right? I also maybe can. Right. So from what I know, so I'm not an expert in federated learning. I know this is an approach to distribute the training across different clients. So for me, I would see it maybe as a technique to improve the security of biometric system by distributing parts of the biometric template, right? Now for PAD, I don't know how it is applicable. Maybe it is, but I don't see it here.
Okay, thank you. So another question is, so presentation attack detection is something that's really needed for operational systems, right? And there's a lot of industrial or libraries, or let's say vendors out there that are selling technology like that. So do you have any thoughts on that? Do you know how it performs in practice, or would you even recommend one to someone trying to build a biometric system commercially?
Right. No. So I won't recommend I won't recommend a commercial system in particular. This is not my job, right? I'm not the right person to do these kind of things. What I observe is that actually this is actually a very good situation that many companies are facing this problem, because 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that was almost a taboo in the industry, right? Also, this problem was known. It was very difficult to communicate. There was very few companies that were working on a problem. But now I would say this is a must for most of the companies. All the clients are asking for it. So if you are a customer that need to buy a commercial product that is claiming to reach a certain level of accuracy in terms of recognition, or certain level of accuracy in terms of detection of presentation attacks, but you need to ask this company how this was evaluated and by who, basically. And now, with respect to by who and how, it turns out that now there are certification schemes that exist. So you can request the company whether they obtain a certification. There are mostly, as far as I know, there are mostly two certification schemes that exist, which are FIDO and Android. Also, Android as a certification program, right? And so these certification schemes, they have accredited labs that perform those certification for the scheme. So like this, you can get a certification scheme, an official certification, according to some well-established standards and evaluation procedures established by FIDO or, let's say, Android.
Okay.
Right. So just to mention that you cannot call yourself a certification. For instance, a lab by itself cannot claim that he's a certification body, that it delivers certification. Certification is really something serious and official, right? So you can go to a lab, an independent lab, to get an independent testing, right? That can be very good and very fair, but it cannot be called a certification. It's going to be an attestation or something like this, but that's not certification. The certificate really comes from unofficial body.
Okay, thank you. So another question in the Q&A is, so there's various presentation attack detection techniques available. Some are for faces, fingerprints, voices, so on. Is there any transferability between these models? So can we apply something that works very well on faces to fingerprints or voice prints, or vice versa? So how about let's say the generalization about these techniques across modalities?
So it's possible if you stay within the same domain. So for instance, you have techniques that can be transferred from face to fingerprint and vice versa, as long as you deal with him, because you deal with the same domain, which are images. Also, you have a domain gap, right? But this is the same domain. So for instance, we had some prior work working with other folks in Madrid, where we have been working on using generic image quality measures applied to face, iris, and fingerprint, right? So the same algorithm, the same features, the same techniques can be used. Of course, you need to train or fine-tune for this task, right? So you can have a generic method that is going to work for the 3 different domains. And therefore, this is not applicable directly to another modality such as voice, because the domain is completely different.
Yeah, that makes sense. So also in terms of techniques, right? If we go more into the technical details in the models, you have passive approaches to the detection, but you have also active approaches that use some sort of user collaboration.
Yes.
And probably the industry is more interested in the passive things, right? Because it makes it more convenient for the users. So can you comment on the performance of these types of approaches? So is it comparable? Can we achieve the same level of performance with passive systems than we can with active systems? And in general, what are the pros and cons of one and the other?
Right, so we start with the pros and cons. So this is what I refer in the presentation to as challenge response, right? So, so in general, you would expect, so for, let's say, if we consider a scenario where you would compare PAD in a given spectra, let's say visual spectra, to PAD in a visual spectra plus some challenge response. So you lose challenge response, but you still do live in the same spectra. Then I would say that challenge response has an advantage, right? And would bring more accuracy. I mean, accuracy in terms of detecting presentation attacks, because you have a scenario, if you start prompting or asking an action that is difficult to predict, to anticipate, therefore it's impossible, almost impossible to create this attack in real time. I would say almost impossible. Now with the advance of deepfake technologies, very soon I think that will be possible to create, to have a real-time face converted and voice converted over the internet. So that this attack may be likely at this point. But for now, I would say that being able to do challenge response is going to bring an additional level of security. So theoretically, the accuracy, the security should be higher with a challenge response over a purely passive based. Now, again, it depends how all this is implemented. Maybe you can have a very poor active which is less accurate than the very good passive, right? Now, if you want to go to a step higher, I mean, using different spectra, so additional sensor is probably the only other way to increase further the accuracy. Now, the price to pay you have for that is the convenience, as you say. When you have a challenge response, it means that you need to ask for an interaction that's not very convenient. If you need to ask the person blink now or smile now or move your head or even say something, depending on the application scenario, that's might not be applicable always.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at the time, and we have still a lot of questions left. I would maybe select one more, but for the rest, I would like to thank everybody for all the questions, for all the discussions. I'm curating it a bit. And if you are still interested in more aspects of presentation attack detection, I am sure Professor Marcel will be happy to answer those maybe offline. So just for the sake of completing this, there's maybe a summary questions. question from one of the participants. So after seeing all these attacks and everything that people do to try to circumvent biometric authentication, right? So how secure do you predict or say biometrics is? Can users have a peace of mind when using biometric recognition technology?
Well, I think this is more secure than what it used to be. Well, simply because of what the example we mentioned before, that we have more and more companies that are equipping their technologies with PID. So, which means that I'm assuming that this PID algorithm has a decent accuracy, right? It means that it's more secure than it was. So, as we go, the biometric technologies get more secure, for sure.
Yes. So it's actually an
I'm not saying, yeah, it's an arms race, exactly. So I'm not saying that it's all perfect still, but that's every day it gets better.
Great. So thank you very much for this really nice talk, really nice discussions. So we are really honored, Sebastien, to have you had you as our speaker for this webinar. So we had more than 125 participants at the peak attendance, which I think is really great, and also shows that this topic is really interested to many people working in our community, maybe even beyond the community. So thank you very much again for the nice presentation. And
thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you to all the participants for listening to the talk and for their questions in the QA. So this is it for today's webinar.